Well, good morning. As you may have noticed, we have a guest in the studio today. It's Mr. George Santos, Congressman from Long Island, and today he's dressed all in orange. And got to, George, it's a good look. It really is. And I'm not quite sure why you're dressed. Oh, you're pretending that you've been charged with some criminal misconduct. You're kidding, right? This is one of your jokes, right? Okay, well, it's a good one. You had me there for a second. I'm telling you that you're all right, George. I can see great things in your future, like maybe the White House, right? You could be working in the White House. Yeah, serving drinks. Yeah, just kidding you. I'm kidding you, George. All right, enough of this. George, be quiet now. I've got to talk to the people about something important. And you know what it is. It's the debt limit. Here we go again. So a lot of people, my Republican friends, who are particularly annoying because they are particularly ignorant when it comes to economics. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Elon Musk. He's a young fellow who is. I kind of like him because he and I have a lot in common. So, for example, we're both physics majors. He was also an economics major, and I wasn't. But I was this close to having a joint major. All I needed was somehow to scrape together enough money to go to Michigan for another semester as an out-of-state student. And the head of the department, so the economics department, said if I would do that because of the background I had, they placed out of 3 years of economics. I took only two undergraduate courses. I have had PhD level calculus. It was my minor, and he said I could easily become a joint econ and physics major. So I didn't do it because I went to law school instead. Made a wrong turn and headed right to the law school. And worse, I went to Indiana University Law School. So it was really a bad decision all the way around. And as a result of that, I've led a horrible lifetime as a patent lawyer, trying cases and things like that, which is a complete waste of my time. Now I'm doing something worthwhile. I'm talking to you guys. So nice to see you again. You too, George, especially you. Just sit there, okay? No, don't get up. No one needs to see you in your orange jumpsuit. Just relax. Have a drink over there. That's a boy. Yeah, that's a good boy, George. That's a good boy. Yeah, you and my dog Francois are good boys. But enough of that. Enough about George and enough about Francois. Frankly, I'm sick of talking about him. So I could have done that. So if I done that, this Elon Musk is a nice fellow. You should meet him sometime. He and I would both have degrees in physics and economics. So I can say we both have degrees in physics and economics, except for me. And we're both billionaires, except for me. We're both 6'5", except for me. We both have, SpaceX with rocket ships we own going all over the universe, except for me. And so we're pretty much almost like the same person. So he, how did I even get off to started talking about him? Oh, I was talking about the national debt. So he has nothing to do with the national debt. Why did I even mention him? I have no idea. This guy finds a way of oozing himself into every conversation. He's always there. He even was with my friend Governor DeSantis. When he was announcing he was going to run for president, there was Elon Musk. How the heck did he get in that room with that? I don't know. He's always sneaking around, and now he's involved in my podcast. So we're talking about the national debt. So people say, so my friends say, well, I say, well, name me a Republican who did anything for this country. Well, I like Ronald Reagan, and they always say that. I like Ronald Reagan, and I'm like, how do you get through to these people? Now they're arguing about the debt limit, and what are the Republicans? Suddenly they've got religion on this thing, right? And they're willing to shut the government down. And don't kid yourselves. This right wing of the Republican Party, they're not even the MAGA group. They're just hard right people who are driven by ideology. I don't like anybody who's driven by ideology. I don't care if it's right, left, or middle. If you're driven by ideology, that means you're not thinking. So they're driven by ideology, and they really don't like the government. They want to shut it down. They think it's run by a bunch of people they don't care for, who look down their noses at them, which is probably true, because and deservedly so. So if they can't raise this debt limit, we're not going to be able to pay our bills, and it's going to be a mess for the country. And you know what? Those people don't care. In fact, it's what they want. So for McCarthy to try to bring that group along to do something to deal with this debt problem, it's not going to happen. We're going to default. I'm predicting that. And it's going to be a mess, particularly for those of us in the stock market. We're going to get hit hard. And the interest rates on bonds is going to go through the roof. Why? Because they won't be able to sell bonds, because bonds are now of questionable value. You can't rely on the United States to pay their debts, i.e. redeem the bonds. So what's going to happen is, what happens if you have a product that you can't sell? Well, you have to, particularly what happens if you're trying to borrow money and the bank's not going to lend you money? You say, well, okay, I know the interest rates are 4%, but I'll pay you 20%. And the bank says, well, okay, I'm willing to take a risk that you won't pay me in order to get the 20% if you do. So the Treasury is going to have to raise interest rates in order, and that means bonds are going to be sold at a much higher interest rate. What happens when bonds are sold at a higher interest rate? Well, people abandon the stock market, which is always a risky business, to go into the less risky bond business, and the higher the interest that they're paying, the more likely they are to go in there and say, great, I can get that extra money from the bonds. And that's going to wreak havoc with those of us who are in the stock market, which means everybody my age and above. Well, there aren't that many people above my age, but people in my age group who are retired, who played by the rules, got IRAs, kept our money, went in the market, did fairly well, we're going to take a real hit. And those guys don't care. They're glad to see it, because they're thinking, oh boy, because it's always with politics about these people. Biden's president, he'll get the blame, and that'll help the Republicans in the fall. So this gets to why I get so frustrated with my Republican friends. I agree with Republicans on many issues, particularly like political correctness, on a lot of welfare issues. I'm not a big believer in handing out people money who don't work, who are playing the system, and there's a lot of them that do. Who don't really need the money. I don't like that. I'm big on law and order, and I don't believe in the Black Lives Matter movement where they're running around saying cops are all racist, which is not true at all. So I have a lot of the cultural social issues. Now, not when it comes to the "don't say gay" thing. I think it's terrible to be picking on gay people, and the Republicans have never given up on that. You know why? Because they've sold themselves out, aka Richard Nixon, to capture the previously solid Democratic South by pitching to all of these social issues, particularly anything related to trashing gays or going after black people. There's a reason that in the South, all these preachers are out there talking against abortion, because in the South, something like 67% of the abortions are performed on black women, and they're like 20% of the population. So to them, it's a racial issue. So many of these are racial issues, and that's a whole topic for another day. But when it comes to the fundamental economic issues and the fundamental role of government in the economy, that's where I have had it with Republicans, and always have had. And when I grew up, Roosevelt was president when I was born. Truman was president in my early years. We had Kennedy, we had Lyndon Johnson, we've had, and so on. But the three people who I most admired growing up were Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy. And Roosevelt, so when I grew up with the Republicans that I knew, and I grew up all over the world, but some of my formative years were in Indiana. And in Indiana, it was a Republican state at that time. All I heard was how terrible Roosevelt was because of all these giveaway programs, particularly Social Security, this evil program. So they never, because my uncle, a die-wool Republican, used to say, Republicans have never really forgiven Roosevelt for Social Security. So that was the way the politics were when I was growing up. Republicans were mad at Roosevelt, but Roosevelt came in and changed the structure of the government, got the banks under control, got the stock market under control, He took care of making sure that our elderly people were not dying in poverty as they were when Hoover was president. He just restructured the entire government, basically remade the entire government, with the federal government being far more involved, and with all kinds of safeguards. That's the Democratic Party with which I grew up. It's still fundamentally what the Democratic Party is about. The fundamentals of the Democratic Party have nothing to do with all of these other issues I just discussed. To the far left they are, but the far left is not the Democratic Party. Most Democrats, such as I, are moderate, middle of the road, and conservative on many social issues. Not that conservative, but fundamentally, I just outlined some of them. But on basic economic issues, the Democrats have been, over the years, responsible. And the Republicans, when they get control of the government, all they ever care about is lowering taxes for large corporations and wealthy taxpayers who can afford to pay taxes. That's what drives them. And for some reason, my middle-class Republican friends are blissfully unaware of that. The worst offender in modern times was Ronald Reagan, the man they all think was so wonderful. When Ronald Reagan left office, and listen to me, George, pay attention. When your friend Ronald Reagan left office, the national debt was 3 times what it was when he took over. 3 times. He trebled the national debt in 8 years. Why? Because of a massive tax cut was the first thing he did. Republicans loved it. Plus, really solidified and increased all these tax loopholes, primarily for the oil and gas industry. They get these depletion allowances for oil wells. They get all kinds of tax credits and tax breaks because the oil companies pour, no pun intended, pour huge amount of money into the Republicans' war chest and always have. So you have this unhealthy alliance between Republicans and the oil company, between the Republicans and the wealthy taxpayers. So Ronald Reagan did that. He pushed that agenda like mad. And do my friends and relatives say, well, yes, we like... No, they liked him because he seemed to be a nice guy. They had no idea of what his policies were. That's the legacy of Ronald Reagan. Now, he did a couple of good things. For example, he was tough on some of the things that Israel was doing, which I applauded at the time. But by and large, when you look and say, well, how is the country better off today because of Ronald Reagan? Incidentally, he also had the test ban treaty with Gorbachev, and that was great. And Russia kicked out the communists. Well, that wasn't Ronald Reagan that kicked out the communists. That was Gorbachev. And the reason he did is because we waged economic war, starting with the Truman administration, against the Soviet Union. And administration after administration after administration successfully waged economic war till we finally brought the Russians to the brink of economic collapse because they were spending so much money on their military, and and the rest of their economy was in the I'm not going to use that language, but you know where it was. So Reagan said, well, I ended the Cold War. People say he ended the Cold War. Well, he didn't end the Cold War, but he did cooperate and had a good relationship with Gorbachev on a personal level, and I applaud that. But that's it. Domestically, the only accomplishment of the Ronald Reagan administration was to slash taxes for the wealthy, increase oil depletion allowances for the oil companies, and treble the national debt. Oops, my phone is ringing.